at a time. What does that mean? Well, it means, you know what? When we tweak our heads just a little bit, then a lot of times we immediately get relief. But also, it tends to make us more immune to the dysfunction around us. For example, let's just say, you're around some critical people. Well, if you don't have critical voices that put you down inside your own head, then they don't have a button to push. And so then you can kind of like blow them off a little easier, stuff like that. And we talk about all that here. And so let's do it once again. 844-940-2774 is the number to get on the program. 844-940-2774. Let's do it one more time. 844-940-2774. Lines are open right now because we're just starting, and we're going to hop into it quickly. We do have a webinar coming up next week. Wow, that's fast. We've been talking about this a while, and here it is. And it is on trust. How do you build trust? How do you resolve a break in trust? What if somebody's betrayed you? Can it be repaired? What is the difference between forgiveness and trust? Are they the same? If I forgive you, does that mean I have to trust you? Can I trust somebody again? Are there people you should never trust? We're going to look at all that. That is next week, February 21st at 5 p.m. Pacific. Sign up. If you can't make it at 5 p.m. Pacific when it's live, no worries. You just have to sign up for that one, and then you can stream it later as many times as you want. Here's how you do it. Go to boundaries.me/trust. 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 And while you're there, look around at the boundaries.me website. Sign up. Become a subscriber, or at least try it out. See what you think. And you will find there are almost 100 courses on there, all about life. And so I want you to come join us. We have a great time there. All righty. So, thought for the day. What's your first reaction or feeling when I say this word? Guilt. I don't think there's anybody within the sound of my voice that had a happy feeling when I said guilt. What if I had said joy, happiness, excitement, passion, lust, energy, optimistic, confident? Yeah, we kind of get amped, right? What if I say guilt? Can you feel how it just pulls you down? Well, it does pull you down, and here's why. By definition, this is what the Bible would say, and certainly psychology has, oh my gosh, do we know more about how destructive so many kinds of guilt feelings are. What the Bible says is it is an adversarial kind of emotion, that it comes when there is a charge against us. In fact, when the Bible talks about the opposite of guilt, which is being forgiven, and a state of what Romans 8:1, for example, says no condemnation. That this is a room. Did you know this is a room you could actually live in? It says there is therefore no condemnation, no guilt for those who have asked for forgiveness through Jesus. You know, a lot of people have a hard time accepting that, but that's what he said. And other people go, oh, well, what about people that do stuff wrong after they're forgiven? Well, that's what it asked. It said, yeah, what about that? You know, you do destructive stuff, you know, it's not going to be good for you. You're going to die, right? But guilt is not the answer. Let me ask you this. How many of you whose parents put you on a guilt trip felt highly motivated to go please them when they put you on guilt trips? How many of you who try to exercise your freedom in life, you try to just say, no, I can't do that. Somebody says, oh, okay. Yeah, I thought you cared. Well, I guess I was wrong. I thought we were friends. After all I've done for you, it's going to hurt me a lot more than it's going to hurt you. It just seems like as long as we've been friends, that you could at least do this one thing for me. Maybe one day you'll appreciate me when I'm gone. I mean, I could go on and on. How many of you, when you hear that message, you feel something positive? You don't. It's weighty and it pulls you down. So let's talk for a moment about, quickly, where does guilt come from? How is it resolved? Well, actually, believe it or not, some people have a lot of problems with this, but every system of psychology that has ever studied the human predicament can tell you that humans have this tendency to judge themselves and others very critically. Watch little kids. It's like C.S. Lewis says. Some people say, well, no, I'm really tolerant. I accept everybody just like they are, unconditionally. Well, yeah, what happens when they punch you in the nose, right? That there's this sense of oughtness. Philosophers like Immanuel Kant, for example, the moral imperative, there is a sense of oughtness, some sort of we should, whatever you fill that in with, different philosophies, different religions, they'll fill in the you should ... in different ways. Parents fill it in different ways. But see, when we fail the should, that's when we get under this critical kind of judgment. And that's something called guilt. And it is basically rooted in a very what's the word I'm looking for? Complex and complicated kind of recipe of everything from anger at yourself to a feeling of rejection and sometimes withdrawal of love that is abandonment. And the abandoned alone self feels bad because an alone self is a bad self. And it's just very complicated. And it's baked into human existence. Why? Because we are imperfect and we all fail some standard, either real or imagined, either ours or someone else's. So there's this gap between something that I ought to be and something that I am, and we are born there. So what do we do to get out of it? Well, before we can get out of it, let me tell you this, it gets a hell of a lot worse. Because then not only do we feel this, and not only do we put other people under it, siblings yell at each other and, say, you did this to me, you did that, but parenting itself is kind of this standard. And a lot of times parents that speak in anger and they use angry correction or harshness or shame or any kind of message like that, those voices get internalized to the already critical voice that all humans are born with some vestige of. And so now we got these critical voices in our heads. And now you don't even need a relationship to feel bad. You can do it all by yourself at home in the comfort of your own living room or in your car. And that self-attack, it's baked into depression and anxiety and fear and panic disorders and addictions. So here's the problem. We're caught in a circle, right? It's inside of us. It attacks us from the inside. The standards are inside of us. And then it's outside of us. The standards are outside of us. And then people are putting us down with those standards or attacking those standards. And we're evaluating our own behavior or someone else's. And then it ends up in this pile of guilt. And what happens is you try to work your way out of it. Well, if I can be good enough, that'll resolve it. No. Good luck with that one, because it is an impossible standard, because we will never be good enough. And the voices are still there until they're not. Okay, so how do we resolve guilt? Well, you'll never resolve the voices in your head by being good enough, because they're still there. It's sort of like you had a bunch of people with assault rifles out on your sidewalk that are going to shoot you when you walk out of your yard. Well, just because you stay in your yard doesn't mean the assault rifles are gone. right? Those voices are still there, even if I'm trying to be good. So that's why some kids that try to, and some adults even, they try to do everything perfectly, and then when they fail, and they feel horrible, and then they also feel cheated because I've tried to be as good. It doesn't matter. Why did I try so hard? And it's just terrible. So what do we do? Well, it's got to be a multi-pronged approach, and primarily, guilt is resolved by forgiveness. Yeah. That somebody has got to remove the penalty for our not reaching up to the standard. Now, some people try to do this by getting rid of standards. I've got a lot of people who aren't people of faith and ask them, why don't you like God? Why don't you believe in Jesus? He's got a lot of good things he'd like to bring here. Why don't you come to church with me or something? And I've had so many of them say, hey, I can't get into that religion stuff. I can't stand the guilt. Well, I agree if that's what it was. But actually, it's the opposite. That Jesus said, I came not to condemn you or judge you. He said, I came to forgive. And so the first thing we need to do is that somebody with the right to forgive us, have them forgive us. Well, the only person that can really judge us, even though we judge each other, that's a bunch of BS. The only one that has the right to judge us is the only one that has the right to judge us, the one that's never screwed up, and that would be God, the perfect God. And the only one that had the right to pay the penalty for us would be the perfect human, and that would be Jesus. And that's what we call the good news of the gospel, that he says, let me pay the penalty for you, and I will release you from the burden of guilt, and you will be forgiven. All right. Same thing in the human relationship. The person that we have violated the standard, we need forgiveness from them too. And that's why it's so important in relationships to restore the feeling of connectedness, to go to somebody and say, I'm sorry. And somebody else say, thank you. I forgive you. Feel the energy coming back into the relationship. So primarily, we have to look at guilt as a relational dynamic that also has a legal dynamic to it, that the relationship that owns the standard gets to forgive us and accept us. And that's a wonderful thing. So the first thing we need to do is, if it's existential guilt, like I've violated moral standards that exist in the universe, then going to God, and we don't have to beg him. He's begging us to be forgiven. What a deal. Right? You might have had a withholding parent. You had to claw back, get into a circle of love again. I will never do it again, mommy. Oh, daddy, I will never do. I'm so sorry. And you're begging for forgiveness. Well, the crazy thing about God is that he's begging us to receive his forgiveness. In fact, he says some people won't come to my party. And so he goes and invites a bunch of other people. That's one of the stories he tells. So the first thing is, we can be forgiven relationally by God, and we can be forgiven relationally by others by going and asking. Now, God's never going to withhold that forgiveness. He says that over and over and over and over and over. There's nothing you can do that he will not forgive you for, just simply by receiving his payment for the penalty and saying we're sorry. Only thing that's not forgiving, can be forgiven for, is not receiving the forgiveness. Well, duh, that's a truism, right? And with people, here's the way it works. If you've done something and you own it, and you say, you know what, I'm really sorry, and you go to them and they withhold it, you've done everything that you can do. Now, you're not going to probably feel very close to them if they're still holding a grudge. But then what God says is they got an issue with him. If they won't forgive you, they got a problem with him. Because he says, if you don't forgive him, I'm not going to forgive you. And so all we can do with humans, and this is how you define a good relationship on one measure, and that is relationships that are going to be good and are going to be, have a future and a hope, have got to be forgiving relationships instead of punitive, guilt-inducing relationships. So the first thing is getting relational reconciliation. Now, the problem is many of you, best of your ability, you've been forgiven by God, and yet you still feel guilty, right? Well, that's a problem. That's the problem. It's a problem because you are forgiven. There's nothing wrong with the formula. I mean, you are forgiven, but the problem is there's a voice in there. The Bible talks about this as a weak conscience. And it says when our heart condemns us, that God is greater than our heart. He doesn't condemn us, but our hearts can condemn us. Our voices in our head can condemn us. And that's why it's very, very important to do two things, actually three things. And this is how it's resolved. First of all, name those voices. You come by them naturally. There's probably a parent behind them, or authority figures, or a teacher, or an ex, or somebody that's their voice that lives in your head. We have to name it, and then we have to reject it. And that's probably going to involve some anger for how it hurt, and getting, kind of like getting it out of your head. Say, no, I'm not going to believe that. That's my mother's voice, or my father's voice, or my teacher's voice, or the church's voice, or whatever. I'm not going to accept that. And you name it, and you get it out there, out of your noggin. Okay, it's taking up space in your head. It's not paying rent. That's not fair. So evict it. All right, and that's the process. But it's going to involve some pushing on your part to get out of your head. Secondly, some of this thinking is ours. So we've really got to work on, I used to look at myself this way. Now I'm going to look at myself this way. And when I fail, I'm going to say, it's okay. No problem. You're accepted. You're forgiven. And we do have to change some of our own thinking. And then thirdly, and I do believe that this is the real powerful one for many reasons. Excuse me. And that is, we have to get in a circle of different kinds of voices. See, a lot of times people will confess to God and God will forgive them. They still feel guilty. Why is it not working? Well, we're not doing everything the Bible says. The Bible says also in James 5, it says, confess to one another so that you can be healed. See, when we get in a circle and we let people know about our failures, people go to a recovery group, they go to AA or something, and they say, oh my gosh, I got wasted. I fell off the wagon, and hi, my name's Henry, and I'm a, whatever, aholic. And the group goes, hi, Henry, we're glad you're here. What? You're glad I'm here? I feel so. No, you're not bad. We love you. What? I'm an idiot. No, you're not an idiot. We're glad you're here. And those new voices get internalized where those old voices were, as the Bible says, to accept one another just as God in Christ has accepted you. And those new voices get taken into our heads. Then you see people in recovery, and they go to their group after, however long they've been, where the voices are getting changed. They walk in and say, can you believe it? I did it again. And everybody says it's okay. And how did you do it? Now we go from condemning ourselves to you get curious about what triggered me and why did I let myself happen? Now we can solve problems because the guilt is gone. You can't get over a problem as long as you're feeling guilty. You got to get the guilt out of the way in order to solve the problem. If I walk into the dentist office, I can't solve my cavity if I'm yelling at myself, I'm such an idiot, I can't believe I got a cavity, or he's yelling at me, or she's yelling at me. Well, everybody just shut up so we can fix the cavity? Yeah, good idea. Why don't we do that? Well, that's kind of the message of the Bible. Let's get rid of this guilt thing, and then let's fix the cavities. So, voices in our heads, our own thinking, the lack of being reconciled in forgiveness to God or to other people, and then the lack of being in a circle where we're learning new things. Try that. A lot of good stuff in those steps for us if we do it. All righty, let's go to the phones. I don't know. Am I missing my Italian food or something? From YouTube in Oklahoma, Sherry is calling us with the question. Here's a good one. Do narcissists know what they're doing? Or are they unaware of it? Is it automatic for them to be manipulative, like a defense mechanism? Is there a way to make them see it? Sherry, what do you think?
Honestly, I would think it would be obvious after a while when people keep leaving them and relationships fall apart. So,
yeah, you would think that. You hear the story about the guy that thought he was dead?
No.
You know that story?
No.
Yeah, he thinks he's dead, and his wife's trying to talk him out of it, and she takes him to the doctor. Psychiatrist says, "What's the problem?" She goes, "My husband thinks he's dead." And she turns to the husband, and the husband goes, "Yeah, I'm dead." He says, "Well, we can find out pretty easily. I'm a medical doctor, and I can tell you it's a medical fact. Dead men don't bleed. And so I'm going to prick your finger here, and we'll find out." And he pricks his finger, and the guy starts bleeding. And then he looks up at the doctor, and he says, "How about that, doc? Dead men do bleed." So, so when you say you would think it's obvious to them when people keep leaving, no, sometimes it's not very obvious to them. But sometimes people leaving them can make them aware of it. So tell me what's behind your question when you're, is this an academic question for you, or like what's got you wondering about narcissists?
There's been two very narcissistic people that I've had to deal with in my life. One
Only
personal,
two?
one business.
Boy, you're lucky.
I am very lucky. I'm very blessed. I guess I could say narcissists have a huge impact on my life. One was an ex-husband, and his behavior hadn't changed for 20 years. Been divorced about 3 years, and we still have the same boundaries up about him being involved with the family, and he still acts totally and completely confused.
Well, he can't.
Another one
cannot see his behavior.
He can't. He doesn't understand why his behavior is such a problem to the family.
And has it ever been really, really, really in a contained environment with somebody working with you, attempted to get him to see it?
Yeah, and many attempts at counseling, couple of times through treatment.
Where he was confronted? Okay. So he's had interventions. He's had specialists in the room that know how to do this. Okay. Well, let me... Huh?
No, the whole family didn't have an intervention with a specialist, but during treatment, the second go round of treatment, I was there with the therapist, and seems like all the right things are said, but then as soon as he gets back out in the world, everything starts over again, and he seems to forget anything he said or talked about or learned. So.
And so your question is what? Give me the question.
Well, and then the second one is really confusing to me because it was a business associate that I had to quit working with. And how confusing on that one was what brought us together to be good friends while we were working together was we had our faith in common. And then the more I got to know him, it was kind of the same behavior packaged in a different package. And I guess I'm really confused how someone can really have faith that I think they believe, but then they can still be doing all these things to people. I mean, how can a mind do they know? Do they understand? Are they oblivious? I mean, in both cases, one was very much a Christian. The other one was angry at God for all the hard times that he'd been through. So, and both started with a very damaging childhood. So,
Okay.
I mean, I don't know. I guess at this point in time, I have my ex-husband removed from my life, but still, and my children have had to put up boundaries too. They're just sad that he can't be a grandpa to the kids.
That's really, really sad. So can you put it in, is there a question you want me to answer, or you just want to share that?
No, I guess in a situation where it's been exposed, it's been revealed, it's been discussed, it's been, attempted to have treatment, does that person still not really understand? Because to this point, he's still confused. He just really doesn't understand why his behavior is keeping him away from the family.
Is that your question? Is it an
That's
intellectual not understanding? Is that the question?
My question is, does he truly not see, and is he truly not aware, like the man at the doctor's office, or is it still just he's covering up and doesn't want to?
Is he aware and he just refuses to admit it?
Yeah, I guess. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean,
that's a good question. Now, this is a great question. In fact, we are going to have an upcoming webinar at some point. We haven't set the date yet. If you're a boundaries.me plus member, you'll have access to this on narcissism and dealing with narcissists. Now, one of the things I want to start with is that it is not true. You might have heard this, but it is not true, absolutely not true, that narcissistic people cannot change. It happens all the time. A. B. It is true that some narcissistic people do not change. It happens all the time. C. All narcissists are not alike. There are different kinds of narcissists, which gets very much into the root of some of your questions, Sherry, is that broadly speaking, and it even gets more complicated than this, and we don't have enough time to go into this right now today, but broadly speaking, and we've known this since, I'm going to say since the 30s or 40s of the last century, which is really fascinating because you hear all this pop psychology out there that acts like we don't know anything about how to fix narcissism. It's really weird. Anyway, there's two kinds, basically. One is there's a kind of narcissist that has a lot of injury and a lot of shame, and they have this view of themselves that's unlovable and full of shame and very, very vulnerable. And you just kind of criticize them just a little bit, it just feels so wounding that they develop a very defensive strategy to try to look good and have everybody think they're wonderful, right? And you can't disagree with them. If you disagree with them, then they get very defensive, maybe even angry, and all of that kind of stuff. You recognize that behavior?
Yes, in one of them, yes.
Yeah. Now, that kind of person also is capable of softness and a lot of times very connecting attachment and a lot of love, right? But very defensive if they lose face. They can be very confusing because they can be very, very loving until somebody tries to correct them or until they're put in a bad light or they lose face in some way. Now, that one is vulnerable. How do they change? Well, they change by and large when they get into an environment where there's enough of a cost that is wounding them, a little bit of what they're losing, but an enormous amount of safety because they're so fragile underneath it all. Now, that's the first one. How do you create the safety? Well, we got to make it safe enough for, first of all, some of the open the door a little bit to some of the woundedness, and then you get an open door to some of the woundedness where they can stop being defensive and be sad. Like I was dealing with one of these in a team setting the other day, and they said something about that they were just really really hurt by and but I said to him, I said, I've not seen any hurt in you. All I see is anger and attack. And you got to push and push, and sometimes once you get to be vulnerable, then you can be empathic. And once they start to receive some empathy, gradually they can let down their shell if they choose to. Sometimes they won't. The other one, not shame or vulnerability, but it's the opposite. This is grandiosity. They want to be God. Satan was the ultimate narcissist of type B. See, he was beautiful creature. He was. What did he say? I want to sit in the chair of the Most High. And they caused a rebellion against God because he wanted to be God, even though he was awesome. And then God tossed him, but he's never given up his wish to be God, and the arrogance and the pride and all that. And some people like that, you are never going to get them vulnerable to admit anything. And if they change, it's because the limits are so strong that are put around them that there's no escape, and that they get broken because they finally have to give up their pride, and they break it. And many of them do not do that ever. And as C.S. Lewis said, there will be a lot of people walking around in hell, saying, I am right, I am right, I am right, I am right. They won't even admit it then. So some people are aware, some people are wounded, some people have an agenda to never lose, and they're always going to be right on top. And they're all in between, and they can be in the church or outside of the church. In fact, the Bible says that you better watch out because there are wolves in sheep's clothing in the pew next to you. So don't be surprised if you go to church and run into a really bad person. Okay, does that help?
See, that's yes, it does very much. So that explains both of them perfectly, and that makes so much sense. Now the second one,
two different ones. Second one's way more destructive. The first one's way more bewildering. But I got to run and get to some other people. So I hope that helps you.
Thank you so very much. That was helpful. Very much.
Are you a Boundaries.me member?
I am. Okay. I have been since December. I just have to figure out my login. I'm having trouble with logging in, but yes, I am a member. So I look forward to getting that all figured out. I'm going to
put you on hold. Albie is going to tell you how to figure that out or get connected with the people that will. So thank you for your call.
Thank you so much.
All righty. You're welcome. Jessica, what's happening on the land of social media? Who's asking something fun over there?
Well, I don't know about fun.
Actually, I bet everybody's asking something fun, but we got to grab one of them.
There's a lot of conversation going on. One of the questions that stuck out to me is like, what is the difference between shame and guilt?
I hate that question. I don't hate the question. I hate the problem because it's so complicated. But and you'll hear also, I know all the definitions, guilt is about what you do and shame is about who you are. And, one is ontological and the other is more, kind of like related to behavior and a standard. And you hear all this stuff. But here's why does this frustrate me so much? I'm going to call a therapist and get some help with this. There is a difference, but experientially, sometimes when we talk about one, we're talking about the other. And here's what the basic difference is. Shame basically kind of like is something that we feel inside about ourselves, just being defective and bad. And it's kind of like this, I am I am just dot, 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 and feel ashamed, and it's humiliating, and we lose lovability and all this kind of stuff. Guilt is similar to that. Generally, it is kind of like sometimes people will identify it with related to some sort of specific failure. But here's the big difference. And this is why this is so frustrating. To me, the big difference in guilt is guilt has an angry kind of ingredient in the recipe because it's harsh against the self. If somebody says you're guilty, bam, there's a gavel, the judge beats the desk, and there's there's a punishment. There's the wrath of God, right? There's anger, there's the wrath of parents. And when people have guilt and it's turned against themselves, it just beats them up inside very, very harshly. So I talked about the guilt resolution earlier. Shame, and this is why it's very, very difficult. If you go to Adam and Eve, well, they sinned, right? They did something. It was an action. They were guilty, but they covered themselves up because they were ashamed. And they felt like they weren't good enough in their being. And so I just like to think of shame as somebody just needs to be loved like they are for who they are. You don't need to be ashamed of who you are. You need to be seen. And I like to think of the resolution of shame as having that fig leaf removed. So many people feel ashamed, not even about anything they've done wrong. They might feel ashamed of their body. And they've never even violated anything or anyone with their bodies. They might be ashamed of how they look. That's not a sin. It's their being. It's who they are. They need to be known and they need to be loved. And that's kind of a lot of the resolution to shame, that you're okay. You're okay, And so, does that answer it? I mean, I need days on that one. That's why I hate the question, because it's so convoluted, because it's hard when we have bad feelings about ourselves, it's hard to know, do I need to be loved, or can I dig my way out of this, or, what did I do? And sometimes I didn't do anything. It's just who I am. And basically we need all those ingredients to get out of both of them. All righty. Let's, I'm on a short leash today, clockwise. So I'm going to, some people have been holding. I'm going to ask you oh gosh, I wish I had time. There's so many cool things. I want you guys to call back next time, because there's we need to do a show on narcissism. We should do that, because there's some really good questions. But Jess, I'm going to ask you for one more from social, and then I'm going to have to stop for today.
All right. Disapproval triggers me, and I'm hard on myself about it. I'm an adult married with kids, yet I still feel like a child. How do I get my needs met without feeling afraid and more insecure?
Well, it's interesting. You mentioned two things. You mentioned need, but you mentioned disapproval. And the disapproval thing is exactly like you're saying. Whenever disapproval is kind of like debilitating to us, it kind of says by definition that we feel under somebody that has the power to approve or disapprove. Approval comes from above. It can only come from above. Like and dislike is horizontal. Peers like and dislike each other, but you don't see teenagers looking for approval. They look for acceptance. They look for inclusion. They look for likeness. But approval, it means we're dealing with some sort of authority. So as an adult, something has gotten stuck inside where you're still feeling like a child, which by definition means you're putting other adults that you're equal to. And really the question would be, do you like me or not? And if you don't, why? And if you don't, well, I'm sorry, but maybe I can change that, maybe not. Maybe I need some other friends. But if you put them in the judge position over you, you got to take that power back. In Galatians 4, for example, in the Bible, one of my favorite verses, it says, when we were children, we were under guardians and managers. Well, your parents get to tell you, right? And they get to approve or disapprove. Our friends get to like or dislike. They don't get to approve or disapprove. Now, if they're in a position of authority, the position can. A cop can approve or disapprove of the speed I'm going, but it's not the cop, it's the law that's doing it. He or she's just wearing the uniform, speaking for the law. So when we make humans our judges, that's when we tend to have that problem. And so your needs being met, that's a relational thing. You got to decide that it's okay that you're a human and you have value and you get to have your needs met like anybody else. But they're going to be met by finding safe people to do that. Okay. Wish I had more time today, but we don't. But we are here for you, and we're always here. You can find us at boundaries.me. And if you go to boundaries.me/trust, you can sign up for the webinar that's coming up 2 hours next week, live, you and me, on trust. Who can you trust? Should you trust that person again? They betrayed you. Should you let them back in? Maybe, maybe not. Should you trust somebody to begin with? Maybe, maybe not. But we got to learn the formula and the how-to and the what we got to look for. And the don't you dare trust that person kind of eyes. You need better vision sometimes. So we're going to talk about all that and how to restore trust after it's been broken, if that's possible. With some people, it is. We got to do the right things. And with some people, we shouldn't try to do that until certain things are different. Boundaries.me/trust is the place to find that. And check out the website while you're there, boundaries.me, and all the stuff we have to offer. And I will see you next time. Bye-bye.